moment was when everything really got real and scary. Didn't know if my baby was gonna make it. I think I was gonna cry. That's crazy. Hello all and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I wanted to do a video sharing my birth story and just how it all unfolded, the emotions that were involved, and how it ultimately ended up being an emergency C-section and why. My birth story, I often describe it as traumatic and something that took me a really long time to deal with and get through. It also took me a long time to be able to talk about without crying. It's kind of a serious subject matter and something that has changed my life forever, obviously for the good, because I have my little 11-month-old boy now. There are still some hard things associated with it mentally that I still have to overcome at times, but I felt like I am finally at a place where I can sit down, talk about it, and just share how it affected me. Also kind of just share the good, the bad, and the ugly of what my birth story ended up being. My son is 11 months old, so I am filming this almost a year postpartum, and I feel like I have so much more perspective on it all than I did even just months ago. And so I am so excited to be able to share this with you all and just kind of share this part of my life that is very intimate and also one of the best things that ever happened to me because it brought me my little boy. The purpose of this video isn't to talk about what I did wrong or what I did right or what I would do differently. It's really just to share the story and lay it all out there. I will be going into some detail as far as birth goes, and so if bodily functions and things of that nature concerning birth make you squirmy, you might not enjoy this video. I want to explain the story as fully as I can, and so I feel like I don't want to spare any details, and I want this to be as open and honest as it can be. So that's my purpose behind that. So to start it out, I really just wanted to give some context and background as to how my pregnancy went. So my pregnancy did not go at all how I thought it would, but I also had to deal with a rare condition that not all women have to deal with, and that was hyperemesis gravidarum. It's commonly referred to as HG, also known as extreme morning sickness. This condition really crippled me for the first 3 months of my pregnancy. I was constantly sick, throwing up. I lost 15 pounds in my first trimester and was pretty much bedridden for my entire first trimester. And that season was extremely hard for me. I dealt with obviously feeling physically ill and physically weak. I also dealt with some really bad mental issues as far as just feeling depressed and gloomy. Having that as the start to my pregnancy was really hard. I felt like I was kind of set up to just be weak for the rest of my pregnancy. I was very exhausted going into my birth and into my third trimester. I had gained weight rapidly, and having a big baby, I was very large, and so I was just ready for Brooks to get out of my body. I was so tired of being pregnant and honestly desperate to not be pregnant anymore. My due date for Brooks was December 19th of 2021, and I had always thought I was gonna go early. I think it was because of how rapidly I had gained weight and how rapidly I had grown. I thought surely this baby is gonna lose room and I'm just gonna have to go into labor because I don't see how he can keep growing. My due date came and it went, and I just remember being so sad about it. I was on a ball all day. I was doing steps. I was doing everything I could to get labor going because I was so ready for it to just be done and birth to be done. Unfortunately, none of my efforts were successful. And at my 41-week appointment, they had mentioned the idea of induction. Induction was something I was somewhat familiar with because I had known people who had had inductions and had had successful deliveries with inductions. And so for me, I was just kind of like, yeah, I'm willing to do it. I really just don't want to be pregnant anymore. I'm so done with being pregnant. So they had told me that they would put me on the list for an elective induction and that they would call me because obviously the women who go into labor naturally and then women who have emergencies and such, they have to leave room for them on the list. So I was put on the list, but they couldn't guarantee me a certain date that I would have an induction. But also at my 41-week appointment, I opted for a membrane sweep. It is basically when the OB or midwife will go up to the cervix and puts their fingers between the sac and your uterus and just kind of creates a space around the sac, and it's supposed to help induce labor naturally and kind of get things going. And so at my 41-week appointment, my midwife checked my dilation and went ahead and did a membrane sweep and said that I had progressed. I was at 3 centimeters dilated, and that if the membrane sweep was going to induce me, I would probably start feeling signs of it in the next few days. And so I took that with me and went home, and later that day actually ended up losing my mucus plug, which was really exciting for me. Mucus plug is basically just the plug that forms at the entrance of your cervix when you get pregnant. It's there throughout your pregnancy to keep bacteria and germs out of the uterus and protect the baby from bacteria and germs. And so typically when you lose your mucus plug, it can be a sign of early labor. And so when I lost my mucus plug, I was so excited and just like, okay, I'm progressing. Like, I hadn't seen any signs of progressing before that, so I was really excited. Just felt like, okay, things are happening, like we're working towards something. A few days later, I had scheduled a labor-inducing massage with a local doula. I went to that appointment, and it was honestly one of the best things I ever did for myself while pregnant. I told her I wish I had had more massages while pregnant because your body gets so tight and tense, and just you have so much tension everywhere around your body. Even the doula who did my labor-inducing massage was saying that my body was starting to progress. My back had really been in early labor, and so she would be surprised if I didn't have my baby on Christmas. It was December 24th that she gave me my massage, so she was really getting me excited that this baby's coming soon. I'd be surprised if he's not born tomorrow, and I was super excited hearing all of that. So days passed after the massage, and still I hadn't gone into labor. I had been having Braxton Hicks for probably the entire month of December. I knew what that felt like. We get a call on December 29th that there was an opening at the hospital, and that if I wanted to go in to get induced that night, I could. I remember just getting that phone call and being so excited and just ready to have my baby. We went into the hospital December 29th around 11 p.m. and they started the induction around midnight. I opted for Pitocin, again, because I knew a lot of people who used Pitocin, and it was just a standard induction method for me. I didn't feel uncomfortable by it or anything. Started me on Pitocin and just kind of told me to wait, and whenever I wanted my epidural, I could ask for it. Contractions started picking up, and I remember just kind of sitting in the room and laying there while these contractions are happening to me, and I was just like, I can't lay in this bed while these like insane contractions are happening to me. I need to get out of this bed. So I got out and got on a ball and just kind of started bouncing and did that for a good bit. I remember just feeling really scared that I wouldn't get the epidural in time. and that was because I hadn't mentally prepared for birth. I wasn't prepared to approach birth without an epidural. My mom had actually had to give birth without an epidural with me because I had progressed so quickly. There wasn't any time to get an epidural. So I was very afraid of that happening to me. I was just constantly in my head trying to figure out, okay, when should I get the epidural? When should I get the epidural? As these contractions were building and building. And so I remember it was probably around 4 a.m. and the contractions were at a point where they were really painful. I couldn't talk while they were happening and I was having to breathe through them. At this point, I was like, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and get the epidural. Better to be safe than sorry. I went ahead and got the epidural around 4 a.m. And once that happened, it was so relaxing. All of my body just felt complete relief. I had had back pain like all of my pregnancy, and the back pain went away, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like it was amazing. And so I laid back and just kind of started to rest because I knew that, okay, now we just gotta relax and let this baby progress and let this birth progress. The nurse came in every so often and would flip me, and I continued with just eating chicken broth and Jello while I was starting to progress. Later in the day on the 30th, I want to say it was around 2 p.m., the midwife came in to check my progression and see if I had dilated more at all. She went ahead and checked my dilation and told me that I hadn't progressed at all. That was extremely discouraging just because I had been in labor for hours and hours, all the while thinking that my baby is progressing, and then to hear that he wasn't was really discouraging. At that moment, she recommended that I have my waters broken. I thought about it for a second and then told her that that's totally fine. I, again, knew people that did that. So the things that I felt comfortable doing was because I had known people that had done it. And that's kind of what I based my birth decisions off of. I'd known someone who had their waters popped, and so I said, sure, let's do it. And she went ahead and popped them and noticed that the waters were a murky color. And she then explained that that was because Brooks had already had his first bowel movement because he was late in my uterus. That just meant that once he was born, they would have to take him away and vacuum his lungs before he could have any skin to skin. Obviously, that wasn't something I could control, and was the first major change in my birth plan, because one of the things that was so important to me about my birth plan was to have skin to skin immediately after giving birth. So that aspect of my birth plan had to be let go of because of the fact that he did have his first poop in my womb. So she popped my waters and then left the room for me to just kind of progress. And I remember the contractions just being so strong after that. I felt the pressure on my stomach and me just being like, whoa, these are completely different than the contractions I've been feeling. And I feel like this is crazy. I'm really starting to progress. Immediately though, after this happened, as the contractions happened, his heart rate dropped significantly. And I remember looking at the monitor and being like, I don't think that's normal, and I think something's wrong. We went to call in the nurse. The midwife actually came in herself and explained that she had noticed it on their monitor and wanted to just go ahead and check and make sure everything was okay. But that most likely the reason why his heart rate was dropping was because there wasn't a lot of cushion in there anymore for him. And so that they would probably need to pump water into my uterus so there was more cushion for him during the contractions. They explained they were going to use this certain device. I don't remember what it was called, but basically it would just go next to his head and pump fluid into my uterus to provide a cushion during contractions. So obviously I'm okay with this because I want to make sure his heart rate is at a safe place. And so I explained to them, okay, that's fine. Do what you have to do. The midwife went to check my cervix again, just to check for placement and where to put the device. And that was the moment when she explained that she actually felt cord. And at this moment was when everything really got real and scary. She explained to the nurse that she felt cord, and immediately the nurse went to press a button, and she looked me in the eyes and was just like, so basically, change of plans. I feel your umbilical cord, and that means that your umbilical cord is between the baby's head and your cervix. And this is extremely dangerous because during contractions, baby's head is pushing on the cord and cutting off all circulation to the baby. And so because this is happening, we have to have an emergency C-section right away to get baby out as soon as we can for your safety and for baby safety. While she was explaining this, I was just trying to slow down my breathing, calm down, and not freak out, because I knew I was having a C-section and I was having to accept that immediately. The room just filled with so many people. There were a bunch of nurses, there was an OB, the anesthesiologist came in, and it all just became really overwhelming, especially I think because they were all surrounding me and I couldn't see my husband very well. I couldn't see my mom. And so I remember just like looking at the clock for some reason. I don't know why, but I was just staring at the clock, looking at like each second and trying to breathe and trying so hard not to cry because I didn't want to be freaking out while all this was happening. I knew that was just going to make it so much worse. The OBGYN came in, and because she was the one that was going to have to perform my C-section, and she handed me some papers to sign for the C-section, for liabilities and all of that. And then I was handed a small cup of a drink to neutralize my stomach acid, so I had to drink that. And then the anesthesiologist was telling me what he was doing, just starting to numb me from the chest down. And so all of this was going on, and while this was going on, the midwife was still keeping her fingers up in my cervix on Brooks's head to keep his head off of the umbilical cord, and she remained that way the whole way to the operating room. So as soon as they got me numbed and ready and prepped, they wheeled me to the operating room. And that was extremely scary because, again, I was being taken away from my mom and my husband and just wheeled into this room where I didn't know what was going to happen, and I didn't know if my baby was going to make it. I just remember like looking up at the ceiling, and they took a few seconds and like set me in front of the door before wheeling me in. And I remember just sitting in front of the door being like, it was like one of those like out of body moments where you're like, okay, this is the beginning between something that's going to be completely life altering and I don't know what it is. And so I was laying there in front of the door and just like looked up at the ceiling and looked up at the like door sign. And I was just like, God, in this moment, like time slowed down, and I was just like, God, please, like whatever happens, just protect Brooks and like keep him safe and give me peace. And all I can do is like trust you, because I am completely I didn't think I was gonna cry. This is crazy. I think just when I think about this moment, it's when I like get kind of emotional. Yeah. So I just remember being like, God, keep Brooke safe, and like my life is in your hands. Like whatever happens, happens. They wheeled me in, and they had like a blanket under me and just like lifted me onto the table. I remember feeling like a whale because I was just like just ginormous being put on a table. I couldn't move. They immediately like set up the curtain and started prepping me for surgery. And I'm just like staring up at these bright, sterile, like these bright lights in our sterile room. And honestly, the feeling of just like being on a table with like all these people around you with masks on and you're just by yourself, like you just feel like a science experiment. That's literally how I felt. But this one nurse really, I think, saw the fear in my eyes and how scared I was, and like came up to me and was just like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I was just like starting to cry, and she was like, "You're doing great. You're amazing. This is nothing. Like, you've got this. Like, you're gonna get through this. Like, it's gonna be okay." And so I'm just like holding this nurse's hand who I'd never met and just crying, and she's comforting me. And then Trevor finally gets in the room with his, surgery room get up on, and sits next to my head, and I like grab his hand, and they say that they're going to begin the C-section. They start the C-section and they're going to take him out, and Brooks was born with a big head, and so they're wiggling him around and wiggling and trying to maneuver his head out. And I remember just feeling this like weird pressure on my belly, and I could tell they were struggling to get him out. And I was just like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh wow, you're probably so glad like you didn't have a vaginal delivery because this baby is huge." And I was just laying there like, okay. And they finally get him out, and everybody always asks me like what it feels like when a baby's being pulled out of you, and I always say it literally feels like a toilet plunger like on your belly, because that's the most accurate way I can describe how it felt. But they finally get him out, and he just starts screaming, crying, and Trevor and I are just bawling tears of joy because we're just so relieved that he was okay, and that that we were gonna be okay. And so they hold him up, and they're like, obviously I can't see anything, I'm just looking at the ceiling, there's a curtain, and Trevor can see him, and I'm just like having serious FOMO. But I'm laying there like, what's going on? And they're like, describe baby to mama, like telling Trevor to describe him to me. And Trevor was like, he's got dark hair and he looks just like me. And I was like, awesome. But it was so sweet. Just in that moment, we were both just like so new to being parents. We just didn't know what was going on, and we were taking it all in. And so they had to vacuum his lungs and took him to the other room to measure him, and he was so healthy, and he was a whole 9 pounds and 9 ounces, just as healthy as he could be. And I just remember being so thankful that though we went through a time where it was really scary and we didn't know what was going to happen, that in the end, God showed his faithfulness, and we ended up with a beautiful, healthy baby boy. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I remember being in postpartum and feeling so bitter toward my birth, and it was just a wave of emotions every time I thought of it. It was bitterness, but it was also sadness. And I remember just having to actually grieve my birth because it didn't go the way I wanted it to. Having to come to terms with that and realize that the way it did happen was ultimately what was best for me. And I learned so much through it. I've met so many amazing women and moms who have had similar stories to me that I've been able to relate to in a way that I never would have been able to relate to if I hadn't gone through what I went through. Just being able to see the light in such a hard and sad time and scary time has been one of the biggest keys to my healing, I think, and to being able to look back on my birth in an appreciative way. That's kind of the point of me making this video and just sharing that story, is so that if you're a mom out there who maybe had a birth go differently than she wanted, or even maybe had the birth go exactly the way she wanted but feels still so alone in that, just to know that you're not alone is so powerful. And to also remember that getting connected with other moms is one of the best ways to heal and learn from your birth and grow in a way that you just can't on your own and when you isolate yourself. Thank you guys so much for just taking the time to listen to my story and what my birth experience was like. There's a million videos I feel like I could make just on my birth alone. on things that I feel like I did right, things that I would maybe have done differently, and ultimately and just the list of things that I already know I'm going to do differently for future pregnancies. So if you have any other video ideas concerning that, you can let me know in the comments below. Also, I would love to hear your birth story. If you have had a baby, what your story was. So let me know that in the comments below. Or if you haven't had a baby and you're planning to, what your birth plan is. So if you want to leave those down below, that would be great. But as always, thank you guys so much again, and we will see you in the next video. The fact that I managed to film this whole video and Brooks is still napping is success.